When you reach for bacon in the grocery store, you're making a choice that feels straightforward. It's protein. It's breakfast. It's something you've probably bought the same way for years without much deliberation. But the bacon aisle has become something far more complicated than most shoppers realize. The industry has learned to exploit a simple psychological truth. Most people won't read past the front of the package. And that reality has created an entire landscape where premium branding, misleading imagery, contradictory claims, and ingredient compromises have become the norm rather than the exception. Understanding what's actually happening in the bacon industry is the key to recognizing the same deceptive patterns that appear across nearly every other product you buy. This matters because bacon represents one of the clearest and most revealing examples of how familiar, everyday products have drifted away from what buyers actually think they're getting when they pay for them. You see the word natural splashed across the front, or you see an image of a farm with white fences and rolling green fields, and your brain fills in the rest of the narrative automatically. You imagine ethical treatment, careful processing, simple ingredients, real smoking over hardwood. But the real story, the story that determines what you're actually eating, lives in the details that manufacturers have learned to bury deep in the ingredient panel, the sourcing footnotes, and the fine print that almost nobody reads. When you understand what's actually happening in the bacon industry, and how manufacturers have engineered the gap between perception and reality, you start to see the same manipulative patterns everywhere. This isn't just about bacon. It's about learning to read the invisible contract between you and the brands that want your money, and understanding why that contract has become increasingly one-sided. The core problem is straightforward. Bacon is one of the most heavily engineered and manipulated products in the entire meat aisle. It starts with a real cut of pork, yes. But what happens to that pork after it arrives at the processing facility is where the category fragments into choices that range from genuinely good to genuinely misleading. The industry has discovered that you can add water through injection, add sodium through aggressive curing, add curing salts that aren't what the package implies, add smoke flavoring instead of exposing the meat to real smoke, and still legally call it bacon. You can source pork from farms with practices that directly contradict the image printed on your package. You can market a product as premium or artisanal or craft while cutting corners that make it functionally identical to a budget alternative sold 3 feet away in the same aisle. The bacon industry has essentially learned to exploit the trust that consumers bring to the category. Most people approach bacon shopping with certain assumptions built in. You assume that a higher price means better quality. You assume that the word natural on a label means something legally meaningful and regulated. You assume that imagery on packaging reflects the actual reality of how the product was made. The industry has weaponized all 3 of those assumptions. They've created products where every expectation you walk in with gets subtly contradicted by what you actually receive when you cook it at home. And because bacon is something most households buy on a regular basis, often without much conscious thought, the cumulative cost of this manipulation adds up significantly across years of purchases. Understanding bacon requires stepping back from the marketing noise and asking a straightforward question: what actually makes one bacon worth buying over another? The answer hinges on 3 overlapping issues that manufacturers count on you never investigating. First, the actual integrity and sourcing of the pork itself. Second, the honesty and transparency of the curing and processing methods used. Third, the gap between what the front of the package promises and what the ingredient panel actually reveals. Once you understand these 3 things clearly, you begin to see why certain brands have built genuine consumer trust, while others have simply built better packaging and more persuasive language. Let's start with the foundational issue: pork sourcing and what natural actually means in the bacon category. The vast majority of conventional bacon comes from industrially raised pigs. These animals live in conditions that are legal but severe. Many are confined to gestation crates or crowded barns with minimal space for movement. They're fed grain-based diets heavy in corn and soy. They're routinely treated with antibiotics, not just when sick, but as a preventive measure in their water supply, because the crowded conditions create disease risk. The USDA has documented that the vast majority of American pork comes from facilities raising more than 1,000 animals, many with conditions that would shock the average shopper. Yet the bacon marketed as natural or humanely raised or from family farms often comes from these exact same industrial supply chains. The imagery on the package, the red barn, the pastoral scene with green grass, the implied small farm origin, exists in direct contradiction to the industrial reality behind it. This is where the first fundamental deception occurs. A brand can use language like "no artificial ingredients," which is technically true because their shortcuts are all natural ones. They'll add celery juice powder as a curing agent instead of synthetic nitrates, then market this choice as a health upgrade, when the end result is functionally identical in your body. They'll source pork from massive industrial operations, but photograph it against a backdrop of white-fenced farmland where you can't see the actual production facilities. The gap between the visual promise and the sourcing reality is the first red flag that should train you to look closer at everything that claims to be premium. Now here's where the engineering gets more aggressive and financially motivated: the water content and sodium manipulation that happens during processing. Bacon loses water when it cooks. This is unavoidable physics. but manufacturers have learned that they can inject liquid brine deep into the muscle tissue before the curing process begins. This injection adds weight, which adds cost per pound justification for a higher price. It also means that when you cook the bacon, you're losing significantly more water weight, and simultaneously losing more of what you actually paid for. The bacon shrinks dramatically in the pan. Premium bacon brands will sometimes advertise never injected or dry cured, specifically because they've learned that informed, experienced buyers recognize this particular manipulation and resent it. The average shopper, though, grabs a package without checking for water injection, cooks it, watches it shrink to half the apparent size in the pan, and assumes the shrinkage is normal. It isn't normal at the scale that mass-market bacon does it. The water injection is a hidden tax on the buyer that manufacturers have built into their business model. Connected to water injection is sodium content, which varies wildly between brands and often correlates inversely with actual product quality. A truly premium bacon, cured using traditional methods, will have moderate sodium content because it relies on quality pork and real smoking, not excessive salt and chemistry to preserve and flavor the product. But brands that use lower quality pork, less real smoking time, and more chemical processing shortcuts will pile on sodium to compensate for the base product's deficiencies. So you find yourself buying what looks like a premium product with a premium price tag, you get less actual food per package, and you consume significantly more salt than a cheaper alternative across the aisle that actually uses better pork and better methods. The economics are upside down, but the branding makes it feel inverted. The third major issue is smoke, or specifically, the alarming lack of it. This is where the bacon category really reveals its systemic dishonesty. True smoked bacon is exposed to actual smoke from actual wood: hickory, oak, cherry, apple, or other hardwoods. This exposure takes time. It costs money. It produces a complex flavor profile with actual depth that simply cannot be replicated through chemistry. So the industry has solved this problem by using smoke flavoring, or natural smoke flavoring, which is a condensed chemical compound created by burning wood and capturing the volatile compounds. It approximates smoke without actually smoking anything. On the ingredient panel, this gets buried in small text, but the marketing will say smoked or hardwood smoked prominently on the front, and your brain registers real smoke from real wood. It didn't. You're buying a shortcut that tastes faintly of smoke but lacks the actual complexity of truly smoked meat. What emerges from these three issues, sourcing dishonesty, water injection, and chemical smoke flavoring, is a landscape where the bacon industry has essentially figured out how to sell you less actual meat, more water and salt, and more chemistry, while using marketing language that suggests the exact opposite. And this pattern repeats across brand after brand, each one slightly different in execution, but unified in the fundamental gap between the promise and the actual reality. The brands that have built this deception most effectively tend to have something very specific in common. They occupy the middle shelf of the bacon aisle. Not the cheapest brands, which are usually refreshingly honest about what they are. Not the genuinely premium brands sold at specialty stores, which live or die on transparency and word-of-mouth reputation. But the middle-tier brands that have positioned themselves as natural or better enough to justify premium pricing without actually committing to the transparency that would validate that positioning. These are the brands that understand the trust gap is profitable. They invest heavily in imagery, in label design, in carefully chosen phrases like uncured or nitrate-free or from heritage breeds. They understand that most shoppers will see these words and stop reading, satisfied that they've made the smarter choice. One major brand in this space sells bacon marketed as coming from family farms and humanely raised pigs. The sourcing reality is that nearly all their pork comes from the same large-scale industrial suppliers as their mainstream competitors. The imagery on the package shows happy pigs in open fields. The actual farms supplying the pork are typically confined operations with thousands of animals per facility. This brand charges significantly more than commodity bacon, and shoppers pay it because the branding has created a compelling narrative of care and ethical treatment that the actual sourcing simply doesn't support. The visual promise and the supply chain reality are fundamentally misaligned. Another major brand sells what looks like a premium product with a higher price point, using language about naturally smoked and slow cured. The ingredient list reveals water as the second ingredient after pork, sometimes appearing before salt. Smoke flavoring is the primary flavoring agent. They've injected so much liquid that the bacon shrinks noticeably in the pan. The smoke flavor is entirely chemical. A shopper who buys this believing they're getting a slower, more careful product with traditional smoking is being misled at a fundamental level. The price reflects the packaging and the language, not the actual quality of the product. A third major brand has built its entire positioning around no nitrates or nitrites, which sounds health-conscious and appeals to shoppers who've heard vague concerns about cured meat and cancer risk. But the reality is more complicated. They're using celery juice powder as a curing agent, which is high in natural nitrates. Through the curing process, these nitrates convert into nitrites in the meat itself. The end product has a nearly identical chemical profile to conventionally cured bacon made with synthetic nitrates. But because the shopper sees no nitrates on the front, they believe they're making a healthier choice. This is a masterclass in technically true but functionally misleading marketing. The brand charges premium pricing based on this perception gap, even though the actual nutritional profile of the bacon is essentially comparable to many mid-tier alternatives. What's happening across all these examples is the same fundamental strategy. Identify what shoppers care about, find a technically true way to imply you're addressing that concern, and price accordingly. It works because shoppers are busy, and because the bacon category benefits from powerful nostalgic and emotional associations that bypass rational analysis. You don't shop for bacon the way you shop for most products. You shop for it the way you shop for things that feel morally simple. Meat from animals, simple curing, simple smoke. The industry has exploited that emotional clarity by creating complexity that hides behind familiar language. The real insight here is that the bacon category has fragmented into two completely different products that both legally call themselves bacon. On one side, you have genuinely good bacon, from farms with real animal welfare standards, cured with traditional methods, smoked over real hardwood, without water injection, with moderate sodium levels, with transparency about sourcing and methods. These products exist, they cost more, and they deliver an actual product worth the price. A shopper who understands what they're paying for gets real value. On the other side, you have engineered products that have learned to use the word natural and pastoral imagery to justify prices that don't match their actual quality or actual ingredients. The gap between these two categories has become the most profitable space in the bacon aisle. The reason this matters beyond just bacon is that this exact pattern has replicated everywhere in the grocery store. The middle tier, brands that are neither the cheapest commodity options nor genuinely premium, have learned that marketing language and visual design often sell better than actual product quality. You find this same pattern in yogurt, marketed as Greek but filled with gums and starches. You find it in granola sold as natural and wholesome but loaded with sugar. You find it in olive oil, where the origin on the label doesn't match the actual sourcing. You find it in cheese, in coffee, in juice, in nearly every category that matters. Once you see it clearly in bacon, you start to recognize it everywhere. And once you recognize it, your shopping habits change fundamentally. The practical framework for navigating the bacon aisle is actually quite simple, though it requires reading more than the average shopper is used to doing. First, ignore the front of the package entirely. It's designed to manipulate your emotions and psychology, and it will do that job very effectively. Instead, look for specific sourcing information, not vague language about family farms or heritage breeds, but actual farm names or clear statements about where the pork comes from and under what conditions. Second, check the ingredient list carefully for water or brine near the top. If water or broth or brine appears as the second or third ingredient, you're buying a product where a significant portion of the weight is liquid that will cook out. You're paying meat prices for water. Third, look specifically for how smoking is handled. Smoked or hardwood smoked indicates real exposure to actual smoke. Smoke flavoring or natural smoke flavoring indicates chemistry. Fourth, check the sodium content relative to the serving size. Bacon will always be salty, that's part of curing, but extreme sodium levels suggest shortcuts in the base product. Fifth, look at price relative to the actual quality signals. A bacon that's priced 30% higher than alternatives but doesn't score higher on transparency, sourcing clarity, or ingredient integrity isn't premium, it's just better marketed. If you apply these 5 checks consistently, you'll immediately eliminate most of the misleading products in the aisle. What remains are generally honest products, either genuinely good bacon from companies that have built their reputation on transparency and quality, or honest commodity bacon from brands that don't pretend to be something they're not. Neither is a scam. Both are defensible purchases depending on your budget and priorities. The scam exists in the middle, where premium branding meets compromised reality, where higher pricing meets lower quality, where trust is monetized and then betrayed. The brands worth your money tend to have a few specific things in common. They provide specific sourcing information, actual farm names, actual animal welfare practices, actual transparency about their supply chain. They don't inject water, or if they do minimal moisture addition, they're transparent about it. They specify their smoking method clearly and don't hide behind euphemisms like smoke flavoring. They price fairly relative to what they're actually delivering, and importantly, they don't need pastoral imagery to sell you because the actual practices and the actual product quality warrant the price. When you find these brands, you notice the difference immediately. The bacon doesn't shrink as dramatically in the pan. The flavor is more complex and nuanced. You feel better about what you paid because you understand what you got. The deeper pattern here is that the bacon industry has essentially learned to exploit the baseline trust you bring to the category. You approach bacon shopping with certain assumptions and expectations. That a higher price means better quality. That natural on the label means something legally meaningful and regulated. That imagery on packaging reflects the actual reality of how the product was made and where it came from. The industry has weaponized all 3 of those assumptions. They've created products where every expectation you walk in with gets subtly contradicted by what you actually receive when you cook it at home and taste it. And because bacon is something most households buy regularly, often without much conscious thought or comparison, the cost of this manipulation accumulates significantly across years of purchases. Over a decade, the difference between buying genuinely good bacon and buying manipulated mid-tier bacon could amount to hundreds of dollars spent on less food, less quality, and less honesty. Understanding bacon sourcing, curing, and smoking methods is useful knowledge that extends far beyond breakfast. It trains you to think more critically about what natural, premium, and craft actually mean in any product category. It teaches you to look past imagery and marketing language. It shows you that the most profitable space in the grocery store isn't where the quality is best or the prices are lowest, but where the gap between perception and reality is widest. That gap is where most of your food money actually goes. The conversation around food should start here, with something as simple and familiar as bacon, because it's where the patterns become undeniable and impossible to ignore. You're not being paranoid or overthinking if you notice that the product you thought you were buying isn't the product you actually received. You're being observant. You're being a responsible shopper. And once you're observant about bacon, you look at everything else differently. The olive oil that claims to be Italian but sourced from multiple countries. The organic certification that covers minimal actual standards. The artisanal label that means nothing legally and is used on industrial products. The small batch that's made by a multinational corporation with factories on multiple continents. The farm fresh that came from a facility with 10,000 birds in one barn. These are all variations on the exact same bacon problem. Marketing that exploits trust, sourcing that contradicts imagery, and pricing that reflects the brand narrative rather than the actual product quality. The most important insight you can take from understanding bacon is this: the brands that are worth buying don't need to manipulate you, because the actual product does the work. When you taste bacon from real pigs treated fairly, cured using traditional methods, smoked over actual wood, without unnecessary water or excessive salt, you taste the difference immediately. It costs more because it actually costs more to produce. But the relationship between price and value is honest. That's the baseline you should expect everywhere you shop, not just in the bacon aisle. When you find that honest relationship between price and quality, you've found a brand worth returning to. What's in your bacon right now? Check the ingredient list. Look for water or broth near the top. Look at the sourcing information. Notice how much it shrinks in the pan. Notice the complexity of flavor. These small observations add up to a much clearer picture of what you've been buying all this time. And once you see it clearly, the choices become obvious. The brands that are worth your money aren't the ones with the prettiest packaging or the most confident marketing language. They're the ones that earned your trust by being transparent about what they actually are. That's the standard worth applying everywhere.